Welcome to Mershman Seeds Cup of Joe. On this episode, we discuss wheat maturities, nutrient application, planting details, and how all of that affects the overall yields across different geographies. Ben gives us a crop update with nutrient deficiencies, disease pressure, and fungicide applications going on now.
Welcome to Mershman Seeds Cup of Joe. Today we have our regulars. We have Turk and Ben. Turk's been on the road, so I think we'll start with you, Turk.
Yeah, I was down in Mount Vernon, Illinois yesterday, and Brett Ward, our area sales manager down in that area, had a intensive wheat management meeting, and Phil Needham was there, and we went over all the different wheat management issues and what it takes to grow high yielding wheat, and it was a very, very interesting meeting. A lot of information that the attendees learned. There was about 40 people there at this meeting, and so it was a nice meeting and well attended. And but I learned some things that I didn't know, and he had a lot of information, and I think the people that attended are going to be able to grow some really good wheat moving forward. And this is the time of year where we're going to be, wheat sales are going to be starting here very shortly, and in many cases already have. And so I think there's an opportunity for people that can grow some 100 bushel, 150 bushel wheat is possible if you do everything right.
Yeah, we actually had one grower average 100 bushel and two growers?
Two seed growers.
Two seed growers. So, I mean, that's a first for our company. I mean, it's one thing to say you got 100 bushel wheat, but this is what they hauled into this. They got paid for it. Yeah. Scale tickets back it up. And their management wasn't like over the top. I mean, the varieties are getting better. And the nice thing about wheat is there's no tech agreements. There's no chemicals usually, unless you have some type of, maybe down south and then they have a little bit of a weed problem, but up in the north, there's no herbicide, so you avoid that whole problem getting herbicide, and lessens your workload in the spring. We've had so many wet springs, and you don't have to worry about that field. It's already planted.
One of the most interesting things that I heard him talk about was always plant multiple varieties and maturities, and he said, just like corn and soybeans, plant some early, plant some medium, plant some full. Do your early first, then your medium, and then you finish up with your full. You spread out your pollination and your grain fill as much as you can. And so he said in general this past year, our wheat yields were down 10 to 15 bushels, and it was a function of the grain fill period. He said last year we had really, really good wheat, and our grain fill was about 35 days from flowering to maturity. This year it was 31 days, therefore less yield, less wheat. So he said in general 31, 32 days is where we are most years, but if you get a longer grain fill, you're going to get more yield.
Just like corn.
Just like corn.
Pollination to black layer, right? The longer that period is,
yep.
Usually the cooler it is, the longer the period, hotter it is, shorter the period, take away yield.
He said he's never ever seen where if you planted 3 maturities that you would get dinged on all 3 maturities. So he says that's why he highly recommends doing an early, a mid, and a late. And of course, we just happen to have those.
Yep. You can plant the Binti or Katie for your ultra early. You have your Julie or Maddie for the middle, and then your Barbies are our fullest season line that we have. So that matches pretty nicely.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that's the reason. So Philip Needham is from
England.
He's originally from England, but where does he typically?
I believe he's in Tennessee now.
Okay, so their yields down there were 10 to 15 bushel off. And maybe why that is they're a little bit warmer than what we are. Mm-hmm. As you go probably north of St. Louis, I would say the wheat yields have been phenomenal and exceptional this
it was cooler,
year.
and it was cooler up here.
Yeah, so I totally would get behind that.
Mm-hmm. That all makes sense. And then, the English have been intensive management for years, because I know my dad back in the 80s went to England and studied wheat and came back with lots of great ideas, but we just didn't have the varieties at this point or the fungicides to make it happen.
Yeah.
What else did you learn from him?
One of the other things that I heard him talk about is planting depth. He likes to see planting depth 1 to 1.25 inches deep, 1.5 at the very, very most. If you plant deeper than that, you're going to limit tillering, and that was something that I had not heard before. I don't know if you'd heard that, Joe, but
no, I haven't heard that. But I do know the bearded lines that we have. The yield comes from the tillering. So, it's not the old days of one main stem, with a big head on it and then smaller below. Now it's more like a big bush in it, Ben. I mean, you're just getting lots of heads, and the tillering is really, really important on those bearded lines that we sow. So that's a good tip.
And then the other thing that he talked about was planting rate and the difference between mid-October to mid-November, just that 30 days. Every week you have to be increasing your planting rate. And he says in just that 30 days, from the beginning to the end, we're talking about a 25 to 30% increase in planting rate. He said it's that important.
Well, it makes sense. You think about it, it's a little bit like corn and a little bit like soybeans. On corn, if you can plant your corn last week of April, first week of May, in most of our areas, that gives you the maximum yield. And like soybeans, so planting early is like wheat, plant as close to the fly-free date as you possibly can. And then like soybeans, as you get later, what do? You increase your population because you don't get as tall a plant, you don't get as much bushing, so you don't get as much tillering when you plant later. So you compensate by planting more seeds to make up for that tillering you're going to lose.
And that's exactly the same theory, isn't it? So it all is relevant and really, really good information.
Yeah. So to put numbers to that, if we're talking middle of October, like what you were saying there, 1st of October, you're at 1.5 million. By the beginning of November, we want to be at 1.8, 1.9 for that spread difference. Mm-hmm. So those are key things that guys probably don't pay real close attention to. They just try to get the weed out when they can get the weed out.
Did he say anything about phosphate? I mean, because I've always heard over and over again that phosphate has to be there for root development in the fall.
Yes, he did. He was a big, big advocate of putting it in the row. Not broadcast, in the row. He said that will make a huge, huge difference. And of course, that's a problem with a lot of drills to be able to do that. But he says, if you can do that, it will make a huge difference in your yield.
Did he talk about using a 15-inch soybean planter?
He did. He's not a big fan of 15-inch rows, but he says, I get it, that machinery is expensive. He said, and there's nothing the matter with using a 15-inch row planter, but he highly recommends that you double plant it.
So like in a diamond period, or
if you got a flat field and have GPS coordinates that's very accurate, he said put them in the middle. He says there are very few of those where we're planting wheat. So he said you're always on a hill. So he said he would highly recommend a diamond pattern. But he said double plant it. It'll give you 10 more bushels.
So those that had fertilizer attachments could get it on that way.
Could put the phosphate on that, that phosphate on that.
Now, is he talking in the furrow or is he talking on the side, 2x2?
In the furrow.
In the furrow.
Yeah, because I think what he had talked about is there's the math. To do the math on it, you can actually blend DAP or MAP in with your drilled beans. You got to have somebody go blend it. I know there's certain facilities that'll blend just like you do a cover crop and fertilizer at the same time. And I've been thinking about that last night on how I'm going to be able to make that work to get ours blended out and stuff shoved in, because it makes the biggest difference on no-till. And a lot of people no-till on wheat.
That's what he said. No-till, especially, huge.
Right. And that's because phosphorus doesn't move.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't leach. It doesn't move. You may get 1/10 of an inch a year of vertical integration. So.
Well, wheat's a hot topic. So a lot of farmers are checking it out because you can take that marginal ground and make it highly productive, maybe even gross the same number of dollars as your best corn ground with the double crop.
The record wheat yield, I think he said, was 258 bushels.
258.
Worldwide.
Worldwide. Okay. Because as a general rule, we get too hot to get really super high yields like that. In other words, England, more cloudy days, cooler. their wheat comes off a lot longer. They're not trying to double crop. I mean, it's just a little different environment. But I'm just so impressed with the breeders, what they've done with wheat the last few years.
Yep, and the growers that manage it.
Basically, we have a long ways to go to maximize the potential of wheat, don't we?
Absolutely. And as a general rule, I've always said for years that wheat was a convenience crop. If it's convenient, you plant it. If it's convenient, you fertilize it. If it's convenient, you might even harvest it, I mean, but I'm just saying, the number one reason why farmers around here planted wheat for years was, they had a tiling project or a terrace project. They wanted to get a crop off so they get started on it. But it wasn't because they wanted to raise wheat. But that's all changed. I think now we're going for a maximum amount of grain, and then we look for that double crop to just shoot the gross dollars per acre, because farmland is so expensive now. How can we get more? It's hard to acquire farmland. How can we get more out of the land that we have?
Yep.
Okay, good deal. Anything else, Turk?
No. As I went down to southern Illinois, the crops in general, I thought are dry, need rain, but in general looked better than I expected. And I seen dicamba damage in areas, but they got a little rain down there, and it's helped them a lot. And starting to grow out of it a little bit, but they're still dicamba. This rain may bring us another event of vapor drift in on those beans. So we'll see what happens in about 10 days.
I won't think about it, Turk. Ben?
Yep, so this week, some of the things that I've noticed are the areas where we're starting to make a roadmap for next year on what our plan is for next year. I have seen some nitrogen deficiency out in cornfields, so that's going to be your center stripe, your leaves from starting at the bottom of the plant, working their way up, are going to turn yellow in the center and then work their way out, and that is going to work its way up the planter. So maybe we had too much rainfall at one point in time. We had lost some from denitrification. Maybe we didn't get as much on as what we needed, because the crop's looking really good right now, because in a lot of cases we are at blister. We're moving into the milk stage, and then the dough stage. We're pulling lots of nutrients in right now. So that's something to definitely be watching, is what's my nitrogen plan going to look like for next year. Maybe it was fall applied. Maybe we need to be going more split application. Maybe we need to push our nitrogen as late as possible with a product like Y-drops or flying on Amidas or top dressing Amidas, which would be a nitrogen sulfur product. So those are some of the things I've seen on nitrogen. Sulfur deficiency is going to start showing up. It's not the striping that we see early on in the year. It will start to show up in a pale yellow color towards the very top of the plant, because that product is immobile within the plant, so it's going to show up at the newest leaves. So once we get into the milk stage and the dough stage and the corn, that's when sulfur deficiency starts to show up. So be keeping an eye out when you're looking at your fields. If sulfur is something you've never tried before, I imagine it's probably going to start rearing its ugly head. And I've seen a lot of really, really progressive farmers that are running 35 pounds of sulfur in with their corn program, and they've been really, really happy with it. So that's about the number that I shoot for, somewhere between 25 and 35 pounds of sulfur, even on our own acres. And I'm also seeing, because of the drought and the lack of moisture we have in certain areas, I've seen potash deficiency showing up on cornfields. Now, that doesn't mean that our potash levels are necessarily low, that they'd show up low on a soil test, but if you want to potentially avoid that, you can try to raise your potash base saturation level to 5%, or you can go to something where you'd be either putting it on 2x2 with the planter, so you have that potash right where the roots are going to need it, in the, because there's basically a foot by foot block that underneath the corn plant where it pulls in 80% of its nutrients. So if you concentrate that nutrient mass or that nutrient in that zone rather than broadcast or worked or broadcast and no-tilled, you're going to want that particular nutrient in that zone. And potash is something that I think that with strip till, you can do a great job. With 2x2 on your planter, you can do a good job of getting the potash that plant needs right there. And it is a drought stressor. I mean, it's a drought stress defense mechanism because that plant can't pull the potash out. That's why it's showing up around the outsides, edges of the leaves.
Got to have it in soil solution to get in the plant.
Yep.
And if you can get it in that close proximity to that root system, just the heavy dews. I mean, if anybody's walked around the cornfield, on a dewy morning, you can see a wet spot around the base of every single corn plant as the dew runs down and saturates that soil, therefore reactivates that potash to be able to get in the plant. So.
Yep. So having that right next to the plant base is very, very important. Yep. It's really important for photosynthesis and respiration. Potassium is a very, very important one when it comes to drought stress. Being out in a handful of fields this week, gray leaf spot is the only disease I've found. And it's only on the bottom 2 leaves. I haven't found anything higher than the bottom 2 leaves. But what you were talking about, with the leaf wetness in the morning, we're starting to have more and more days where my windows are fogged up when I'm getting ready to walk out the door in the morning. And when the windows are fogged, it means we have a lot of dew. And many of the diseases take 4 to 7 hours of leaf wetness to make that disease come on. I mean, that has to be the right environment, is that length of time for leaf wetness, and we're definitely getting those right now. So I expect to see the acres that are not fungicided already to watch the disease start to climb up through the corn canopy.
They're already talking about rust being out there, tar spots, in areas, and of course, it's just a matter of time. I agree with you, Ben. I think a fungicide application is still the right way to go.
Yep, and there's lots of different ways, and guys are trying a whole bunch of different stuff. We should probably get somebody on that flies a drone, because there's so many different ways that you can get that fungicide on right now, and it's just a matter of tweaking your system to what you like, whether it be over the top or with a helicopter or with a drone. There's lots of ways to get it done, and there's a lot of acres getting done. Soybean diseases, looked at a lot of soybeans this past week. We just have Septoria brown spot. I'm not seeing any frog eye. I'm not seeing any stem cankering too bad of any sort. So from a fungicide standpoint on beans, it's going to be the leaf wetness. It's going to be the frog eye that's coming in, and there's a lot of acres that are just now starting to be sprayed because we are at that R3. If you want to know what R3 looks like, go back to last week's episode, and or Cool Bean has a nice diagnostic
University
tool.
of Wisconsin Cool Bean.
Yep. Conley does a great job with that, and also in cornfields here, Japanese beetles locally are really hammering the silks this year. Haven't seen many of them in the soybean fields yet, but it seems like they are hammering silks pretty hard. So if you haven't put a fungicide on, go scout the field, throw the $2, $4 insecticide in with, just so you can relieve a little bit of stress from that crop and hopefully get perfect pollination. These 2 books right here, Corn Diseases, A Farmer's Guide to Soybean Diseases and A Farmer's Guide to Corn Diseases, are the 2 best books that any farmer, any agronomist should have when it comes to trying to figure out what's out in the field. Plus it has deficiency symptoms in the back as well. So I highly recommend. This one is put together by all the Midwest land grants.
Where can you buy them?
AP Press is one of the places that you can get it, but if you just Google A Farmer's Guide to Corn Diseases, same thing for soybean diseases, I highly recommend them. They're a little bit cashy, but it's a good, it's an excellent $100 spent. So that's what I had this week.
Okay. Well, I'll see how good a job I did this week for you, okay? For corny jokes, okay? I don't know if you knew this or not, but I bought a new pair of gloves today. But they were both left-handed, which on one hand is great, but on the other hand is just not right.
Yep, that'll be right.
I think I got a better one for you this week.
I know Turk has, but he won't tell us.
I got one that's kid-friendly. Did you know that Joe is actually on a different diet right now? You can't tell. He's trimmed down. The camera adds 10 pounds, but we weren't going to worry about that. You know what that diet's called?
What?
It's called the Dolly Parton diet.
Dolly Parton.
Yep. You know, it's Jolene, 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 Jolene.
You're a good singer. Maybe you should just sing that whole the rest of the song.
I don't think so.
Okay. One more, and then we better quit while we're ahead, right? Why did the man who stole my crops need an aspirin? Why did the man who stole my crops need an aspirin? Because he had migraines.
It's terrible.
That's terrible. All right. Thanks for watching this week. We sincerely appreciate your business. We hope that you and your family are safe and healthy, and we'll see you next week.